we're going to go through the 2012 VCAR multiple choice questions. Make sure that you've completed the questions first. I'm only going to go through the answers of some of the trickier questions and perhaps some that the state haven't performed particularly well on. So let's go through the first one. Here, 91% of the state got this one right. The system that produces energy at the fastest rate but has a finite capacity is, and we all know it's the ATP-CP system. Just note that these terms that we're using in class, rate, finite, capacity, all these key terms that we're using, we use them because they're used in exam questions. Question number 2. Also performed well. An initiative aimed at increasing physical activity levels for a given population is more likely to be successful. Note they don't say it will be successful, but it's more likely to be successful if, and the answer is C, and 79% of the state got this one right. The multiple levels of the social ecological model are targeted. Okay, let's move up to question number 3. This was the first tricky question. They actually accepted 2 answers here. Let's have a look at it. Athletes often combine Coca-Cola or cola drinks and water as part of their hydration strategy during an event because, and they accepted A and B. B would be the best answer. Cola drinks have a better taste than water, makes them more palatable, so they're easy to get fluid in. They did accept A. Caffeine in cola is a diuretic, so water is taken to avoid dehydration. Because caffeine is widely accepted in VCAR sort of terms as being a diuretic, that's why they accepted that answer. In actual fact, during exercise, there's a decrease in blood flow towards the kidneys as there's a redistribution of blood flow towards the muscles and the skin. So that diuretic effect doesn't occur as much during exercise. As well as that, if athletes have a tolerance of caffeine, they don't have that effect as much. So A and B were accepted. Okay, question number 4, straight into another tricky question here. It's plyometric question. Single leg hops are an example of a plyometric exercise. In the takeoff phase, which sequence of muscle contractions best describes the contractions utilised by plyometric exercises? So let's have a look, question 4. Only 27% of the state got this one right, and the answer is D, an eccentric contraction followed by a forceful concentric contraction, and most students chose C. But you will know that eccentric, which is lengthening of the muscle, is the start of a plyometric activity. It stores the elastic energy via that stretch, and then it produces that elastic energy and actually gives it off as part of a concentric contraction to increase force production. So it's called that stretch shortening cycle. It also uses the stretch reflex as well. So an eccentric contraction followed by a forceful concentric contraction. You can have a look at the clip on plyometrics if you want to go a little bit further into that one. Question number 5 was done quite well. The most common reason for lack of participation in physical activity is a lack of time. To overcome this, a suitable workplace policy to encourage physical activity during work hours is to. So both A and B, an on-site gymnasium and showers and changing rooms, great strategies for promoting physical activity or encouraging physical activity, but they're environmental changes. They're not workplace policies or physical environmental changes. C, extend lunch break for employers who participate in the work walking group is an excellent policy, and that was the answer. D, make employees participate in half an hour of physical activity each work day. Still 23% of the state said this. You can't make employees do anything. You can't make them run a marathon. You can't make them leave their desks. You can't make them use the stairs. And likewise, you can't make them participate in physical activity. Question number 6. Pretty easy one here. The following is aided by a passive recovery. As soon as you're thinking of passive recovery, hopefully you're thinking about something like the phosphate recovery test, which uses the ATP-CP system, or an event that uses the ATP-CP system, because muscle phosphagen replenishment occurs best during a passive recovery. So the answer to number 6 was D. Number 7, again, another question that was done really well. Questionnaires and surveys are often used to measure the physical activity levels of various populations. A survey will ask respondents to record their physical activity from the previous week rather than a typical week, and that's more useful because what tends to happen is we get this social desirability bias. We want to look better, and the answer, which is C, respondents tend to overestimate physical activity when asked for a typical week. That's what tends to happen. We tend to over-report on the good behaviour and under-report on the bad behaviour. so that's a recall. So we don't get reactivity if we're recording physical activity from the previous week because we're not changing our behaviour. Instead, it's that social desirability bias, and we do tend to overestimate physical activity levels to make ourselves look a little bit better. Question number 8. So this one's probably the one that we're going to spend the most amount of time on because only 27% of the state got this one right. As a result of endurance training, stroke volume will increase at rest and during submaximal exercise. The mechanisms responsible for this are, so let's have a look. Normally what we get is we get at least one that we can just get rid of straight away. And then normally it's out of 2. So let's have a look. The mechanisms responsible for this are an increase in heart rate, cardiac hypertrophy and blood volume. So certainly at rest and during submaximal exercises, we're not going to have an increase in heart rate. So automatically we can get rid of that one. Question B, answer B, an increase in venous return, cardiac hypertrophy and cardiac contractility. Now this was the answer B. What happens is when we've got an increase in stroke volume, we're going to get more blood going around the body, so we're going to get more blood going back to the heart. So we've got an increase in venous return. Cardiac hypertrophy, we're going to get a bigger chamber because we've got more blood coming back during exercise. That means that we're going to have a bigger chamber for more blood to fill, and therefore our stroke volume is going to be larger. And we're going to have cardiac contractility, so the ability for that heart to contract and eject the blood that is in it is going to increase. Now, a lot of students said D, a decrease in heart rate, an increase in cardiac output, and cardiac hypertrophy. So these do occur, but it's all about reading the question here. So the question talks about stroke volume and the mechanisms responsible for this. So yes, we do get a decrease in heart rate, but have a think about it. Is the decrease in heart rate, is that responsible for the increase in stroke volume? It's not. It's that an increase in stroke volume results in a decrease in heart rate in order to maintain or maybe even slightly increase cardiac output. So it's really important that you read the question, understand that there's a cause and effect relationship that exists. So it's an increase in venous return, hypertrophy and contractility that increases stroke volume, not the parameters or the parameter mentioned in C. And of course we don't get a decrease in venous return when we exercise, absolutely not. Question number 9, you're going to have needed to have a look at that graph. 79% of the state got that one right, and that answer was C. So let's go on to D. So for question 10, fartlek training and continuous training are both forms of aerobic training that can be used to develop aerobic capacity. Which statement best describes the main difference between the two? So if we look at that, 81% of the state got this one right. We'll go straight to it. B, intensity. Fartlek training has periods of high intensity, while continuous training is performed at a submaximal effort. Absolutely, that's correct. Question 11, 79% of the state got this one right. At exercise intensities beyond lactate inflection point, there will be a sharp increase in blood lactate. As soon as you see lactate inflection point, you should be thinking about a few things. You should be thinking firstly that the aerobic system's dominant, secondly it's a steady state, and thirdly the definition of lactate inflection point when lactate production is matched by lactate clearance. So as soon as we go over lactate inflection point, lactate cannot be removed as fast as it's produced, and that's B, lactate production exceeding removal. That's the best answer there. Question 12, an acute response to high intensity exercise is decrease in venous return. That definitely doesn't occur. We've got greater cardiac output, so greater venous return. A decrease in AVO2 difference. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We get an increase in AVO2 difference because we have more oxygen being extracted from the blood by the myoglobin because the demand for oxygen during exercise is higher. And that leads us to the answer, which is C, decrease in venous blood oxygen concentration. So what we get is we get a greater oxygen uptake, which means that when we measure oxygen concentration in the blood that's coming out of the muscles, which is the veins or the venules, we get a decrease in that blood concentration. So an increase in AVO2 diff and a decrease in venous blood oxygen concentration. See how they start to use these different terms? So venous, they could have used veins or venule. So it's really important that you're aware of all the different terms that they could use for these particular questions. All right, heading towards the end, question 13. The body responds to altitude training by, and 67% of the state picked this one right, and that's C. Stimulating production of erythropoietin, EPO, and producing greater number of red blood cells. So we do get a slight increase in blood volume, but we really want to hone in on the specific mechanism that increases our oxygen carrying capacity during altitude training, and that is the production of EPO and the production of red blood cells, which enhances the body's ability to carry oxygen around the body to be used by the muscles. The perceived benefits of altitude training will occur for an athlete. And if you have a look at the answers, 82% of the state got this one right, which is C, after 2 to 3 weeks of altitude training, and will last for up to 2 months on return to sea level. So think about it, about 8 weeks or 2 months, whichever one works best for you. So those AFL clubs that go all over America and go and do their altitude training, certainly the physiological effects won't be felt for too much into the season. Psychologically, that's one of the main reasons that they go there. They get benefits, and they think that it's beneficial for them from that perspective. But certainly from a physiological perspective, you will have lost those adaptations that you had to altitude training after about 8 weeks. And last one, question 15. Part of the rationale for anti-doping codes is fairness, and to uphold the rationale, the WADA consider to be doping possession of a prohibited substance. So the answer is B for that particular one. Okay, hope you went well.